Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Re-Federalist Report. I am Brady, also known as the War Hamster. Co-hosting with me is my good friend, constitutional mentor, Mr. Constitution himself, Douglas V. Gibbs.
Good to be here as always.
We are now on episode 12 of our review of Madison's note from the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention. And for those who are just recently picking up this show, the whole purpose of the Re-Federalist Report is to look at everything from original intent of the Constitution's standpoint. And there is no better place to find out what the original intent was of the Constitution than to listen to the words of the people who wrote it in real time. And that's what we're doing. James Madison took copious notes at the convention, and we are going through it line by line. And it's going to be a long journey, but it's been fun so far.
Yeah, and I hadn't gone through Madison's notes in many years, and these notes were critical to my education as an up-and-coming constitutionalist at one point. And second, I've really enjoyed going through them again because now I'm refreshing my memory, should we say. And so there's been a number of times now in radio shows and speeches and things like that where I'll go, yeah, as a matter of fact, just a couple weeks ago, Brady and I, Warhamster and I, were talking about and it ties into what I'm talking about. So I'm enjoying that. So my message to the listener is A, educate yourself, and B, re-educate yourself because you don't always remember what you learned.
Yeah, I've been able to apply a lot of the lessons we've gone through on a daily basis. Whether it be social media debates, discussions,
Right.
what have you. Yeah, it comes up. I mean, this just really it's fundamental to really understanding how our country is supposed to work,
right?
And how it's not working right now.
Yeah, well, and people, it's funny because I get this. Well, there's something wrong with the Constitution because things are not working right now. Look how bad the Constitution is. No. If it's like saying, oh, this recipe is a bad recipe because I substituted this for that, and that makes the recipe a bad recipe. Recipe's fine. It's what's being done is the problem.
Yeah, and I think Brian McClanahan says it really well. He always talks about the Constitution as ratified. Mm-hmm. The Constitution, the way it was written, the original intent, purpose, and how it was argued in the ratification and basically the ratification debates, and more importantly, the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, because the Anti-Federalists, who are several of them are here at the convention in Philadelphia, are saying, whoa, if you do that, the government's going to get out of control. And the Federalists who wanted the Constitution passed are saying, no, that's not what it says. Now, of course, some of them turned around and did just the opposite, Hamilton, but that's a different story for another day.
But what you just said, though, the argument is key here. This is what could happen. This is what happens if it's followed. And they were both right.
Yeah. Correct. And I think everyone here understood what the biggest danger was a too big, too powerful central government, which is what we ended up having. And that's why we call this a Re-Federalist Report, because if this country is going to make it long-term, we need to return to these ideas and these principles of federalism and limited central power. So, with no further ado, let's jump into Madison's notes. Okay, we are on the Avalon Project, which is a wonderful website and database of all things historical. Okay, here we are with Madison's notes. And where we left off, of course, was debating the makeup of this new bicameral legislature, the House of Representatives and the Senate, as it would be known to be called. First thing they'd say on Tuesday, June 12, 1787, the question taken on Resolution 15, referring the new system to the people of the states for ratification, it passed in the affirmative. What are they talking about here? We have, this is the Virginia plan as proposed by Mr. Randolph. Resolution 15 said, resolved that the amendments which shall be offered to the Confederation by the convention ought at a proper time or times after the approbation of Congress to be submitted to an assembly or assembly of representatives recommended by the several legislatures to be expressly chosen by the people to consider and decide thereon. They're talking about how to ratify any changes to the Constitution. Basically, and they're all agreeing that it's going to be done by state convention. Okay. That one passed. Now we get into the meat of today. Mr. Sharman and Mr. Ellsworth moved to fill the blank left in the fourth resolution for the periods of electing members of the first branch with the words every year. What they're talking about in the fourth resolution, how are we going to, they're defining the terms of Congress, and they had blank, how many years should each congressman serve? And they're also going to talk about how old they have to be. Okay. Mr. Rutledge proposes it's okay. Sharman and Ellsworth wanted Congress every year. Mr. Rutledge wants it to be every 2 years. We have the entrance of someone by the name of Mr. Jennifer. He's from Maryland. And by the way, this is spelling is wrong. There's only one N in Jennifer. He proposes every 3 years, observing that the too great frequency of elections rendered the people indifferent to them and made the best man unwilling to engage in so precarious a service. I want to dive into Mr. Jennifer real quick because he's an interesting story. Okay. This is Mr. Daniel of St. Thomas Jennifer. Not really a household name, but he's an important founder.
No, matter of fact, I didn't remember him being a signer. I actually had to look it up just now. Go, okay, yeah, I did sign. Why am I not remembering him? So you're exactly right.
Yeah, he's one of the elder statesmen, and he's good friends with Ben Franklin. He's 64 years old at the time, and he would die 3 years afterwards. He's active for many years in the province of Maryland's colonial government. But when conflict arose with Great Britain, Jennifer embraced the patriot cause. So Maryland's a fascinating state.
Now, real quick. So when it says he was active in its colonial government, and I don't know this because once again, I don't even really haven't spent much time on this guy, if at all. And then it says, but when conflict arose with Great Britain, Jennifer embraced the patriot cause. What's that telling me? By the way, it's worded is, because remember, the governments of the colonies were appointed by the British. Which means he was a British guy. He was one of their guys that was on the inside that was helping run the colony. But when conflict arose, he's like, I'm all for the Patriots. So I just wanted everybody to pick up on that. Go ahead.
No, it's a good observation. It's very accurate too. But Maryland's really unique because it's founded in 1632. It was a charter granted by King Charles to the second Baron of Baltimore named Cecil Calvert. And the Calvert family are the patriarchs of Maryland. They basically ruled the roost. A couple of things on Maryland real quick. Used to be parts of modern Maryland, parts of Delaware, and southern Pennsylvania. I think you talked about it last night on the Constitution show with Ron. The Mason-Dixon line was actually created partly to settle the border dispute between Pennsylvania and Maryland. And the part of Pennsylvania that was part of Maryland, that's where that line was drawn. Difference between North and South. Maryland was all about religious freedom. It was settled by Catholics, but the Protestants would soon outnumber them. And we will later in this show jump into the Maryland Constitution. But the whole idea of religious freedom starts there. And the fascinating part about Maryland, when we go through their state constitution, it's freedom of religion as long as you're Christian. So, you know,
I remember Maryland, though, was established to be a haven for Catholics.
Originally, yes.
But their attitude, even at that time, was, yeah, but you Protestants, come on, man, we're okay with you Protestants.
Well, there was a lot of acrimony between the two for a while. And that's when their religious tolerance was forced to develop that because the Lord of the land was Catholic, and the Calverts, and when more Protestants are there, they had to find a way to get religious tolerance as long as you're Christian.
Right.
And they had issues with one of the biggest slave trading ports, all that. So Maryland's a very, very unique state.
Well,
And
well, Maryland was like Pennsylvania, though, in a sense, where while they didn't have an established religion, dominated by Catholics, but Catholicism was never its established religion, its established church. Pennsylvania, dominated by Quakers. Quakers never had were never the established religion. They didn't believe in established churches, but in both states and colonies, if you were to be involved in the political process, you needed to at least be a Christian.
Okay, so Daniel of St. Thomas Jennifer, his early life, he's born in a place called west of Port Tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
He served as Justice of the Peace, and later the Western District of Maryland. He sat on a commission that settled a boundary dispute between Pennsylvania and Delaware in 1760, and on the Governor's Council, the upper house of Maryland legislature that also served as the colony's Court of Appeals. Up until 1776, he's working for the British government. It says, despite his close ties with the colonial government, Jennifer strongly resented what he and most of the colonial gentry saw as Parliament's arbitrary interference with the colony's affairs, especially its laws concerning taxation and trade regulation. Where have we heard that before? When the revolution came, Jennifer lent his considerable support as a wealthy landowner to the Patriot cause, despite the fact that many leading patriots had been his enemies in the proprietorship struggle. He'd become the president of Maryland's Council of Safety, the patriotic body established to organize Maryland's military forces. When in 1776, a new constitution was framed for the state of Maryland, one of the very first ones. And we're not going to go through the whole Maryland Constitution today. We'll get to it later. But you'll see an awful lot of the framework for what became into the U.S. Constitution. These were not new ideas in Philadelphia. Jennifer commented on the document's neglect of popular sovereignty. The Senate does not appear to me to be a child of the people at large, and therefore will not be supported by them longer than there subsists the most perfect union between the different legislative branches. So during the war, he was on the Continental Congress, which we're talking about now. He was president of Maryland's first Senate until 1780. Managed state finances. Here's an interesting part. Along with James Madison, John Dickinson, George Mason, and his good friend George Washington, Jennifer began to explore ways to solve the economic and political problems that had arisen under the weak Articles of Confederation. Consequently, he attended the Mount Vernon Conference, a meeting that led eventually to the Constitutional Convention. A little bit more on him. Like his old friend Ben Franklin, Jennifer enjoyed the status of elder statesman at the convention. He was 64. He used his prestige as well as humor and reputation as pleasant company to work for a strong and permanent union of the states by reconciling opposing views and formulating the compromises that made the convention a success. And again, we don't hear much about Jennifer in the history we're taught.
And understand something. The good ones often are humble, and you don't hear a lot about them. You hear about what they did. They become famous by not becoming famous.
Okay, one last paragraph of him. We'll get back in it. Jennifer took stands on several important issues, although his advanced age restricted his activity in the day-to-day proceedings. Business experience gained while managing a large plantation had convinced him that an active central government was needed to ensure financial and commercial stability. So he wants a big active government. To that end, Jennifer favored a strong and permanent union of the states in which a Congress representing the people had the power to tax.
There's two things there. There's the favoring of a strong permanent union of the states, which is good, and representing the people and had the power of tax. Because remember, with the Articles of Confederation, was too weak, couldn't tax. But one wonders, based on the language offered here, how Hamiltonian he was. Continue.
Concerned with continuity in the new government, he favored a 3-year term for the United States House of Representatives, which he just proposed a second ago. Too frequent elections, he concluded, might lead to indifference and would make prominent men unwilling to seek office. He was outvoted on this point, we know that, but his reaction was to marvel at the delegates' ability to come to agreement on a plan of government. And here's a quote. The first month, we only came to grips, and the second, it seemed as though we would fly apart forever. However, we came as close as friends of 80 days in but days. He's talking about how.
Yeah, let's stop there for a second. What did Benjamin Franklin say about the first 4 to 5 weeks? That it was chaos. They weren't getting anything done. That they, were the debate was so bad it didn't seem like anything would get done. And so this is a confirmation of that. 2 things happened at the 5th week and the 6th week. 5th week, that's when Benjamin Franklin offered prayer, and they prayed together, or at least those who chose to pray. And at the 6th week, it was realized that they were definitely writing a new constitution, and those who were only there for the purpose of preserving the Articles of Confederation had left. So A, you came together in prayer, and B, the voices that did not like the idea of writing a new constitution were gone. Go ahead.
When Maryland's other delegate, Luther Martin, that's not accurate, they had 4 or 5 delegates, said that he feared being hanged if the people of Maryland approved the Constitution, Jennifer quipped that Martin should stay in Philadelphia so he would not hang in his home state. That's Jennifer Witt. And he would pass away in 1790 near Annapolis.
So he would see the new government go into action, become basically effective, go into effect, but he would not see the ratification of the Bill of Rights. He would see the congressional debates over the Bill of Rights.
Indeed.
He would not see their ratification.
If I remember correctly, Maryland was one of the first states to ratify the Constitution.
Yeah, and this kind of plays into something that I talked about yesterday when I was on the air with Ron, is we forget the dynamics that was going on at the time. What we believe, because we've been told this all of our lives, is there's a North and there was a South. And there was not 2, there were 3. You had New York and the New England states. You had the South, which was North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Then you have the middle states. And the middle states are fascinating. For example, 3 out of 4 of the states that did not have established churches at the time of the writing of the Constitution were middle states. The only one that didn't have an established church other than those 3 would be Rhode Island, which is at the very southern end of those New England states. The other 3 would be Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Maryland.
Yeah, it's interesting that Rhode Island did not, because it was actually founded they wanted to get away from the Quakers.
Right.
And it's interesting that they did not.
Well, and the Quakers never had an established religion, but in the beginning, it was real hard to be respected if you weren't a Quaker. Benjamin Franklin kind of broke that mold.
Yeah, I'd say. All right, so Jennifer's just proposed every 3 years for the Congress. Madison chimes in. He goes, he seconds the motion for 3 years. He says, instability is one of the great vices of our republics to be remedied. 3 years will be necessary in a government so extensive for members to form any knowledge of the various interests of the states to which they do not belong, and of which they
stop
can
right there.
Yeah.
What he's arguing for is that these members of a legislature need to be skilled in the science of politics. In other words, aristocracy. And he's saying, hey, while we don't want elites ruling us, we need to have elites who are knowledgeable in there. And so, in a sense, it's almost a contradiction here. Now, Madison, once again, we're watching his evolution as this progresses. And as with everything that wound up being the Constitution, what happens is a compromise. The pseudo aristocracy in the Senate and the guys who probably don't have a whole lot of knowledge about the various interests of states, but they know a lot about their community and what their community is looking for. And that would become the House.
Very good. Talking about 3 years, he says, and of which they can know but little from the situation of the affairs of their own. He doesn't know what the other states are.
Mm.
He says 1 year will be almost consumed in preparing for and traveling to and from the seat of national business.
Much less preparing for re-election. Sorry.
That's an interesting subject. All right, then get Mr. Gary says the people of New England, this is important, will never give up the point of annual elections. They know the transition made in England from triennial, once every 3 years, to septennial elections, septennial meaning once every 7 years, and will consider such an innovation here as the prelude to a like usurpation. What he's talking about there is in England. Let me pull this up real quick. They passed something called the Triennial Act of 1694, which made it every 3 years. By the late here it goes. Then the Septennial Act of 1716 was passed in May 1716 by the Whig-dominated Parliament under King George I, extending the maximum duration of a parliament from 3 to 7 years. They did that to cement the rule of their party. They didn't want elections, the whims of the people, to overthrow it. They wanted stability. And the people of New England, Mr. Gary is saying, would insist, or they said that was a debacle, the 7 years, and that they will never consider such an innovation.
Yeah, but unfortunately, then the response here is the opposite extreme.
He considered annual elections as the only defense of the people against tyranny. He was as much against a triennial house as against a hereditary executive. So he feels very strongly that it's election every year. Madison observed that if the opinions of the people were to be our guide, it would be difficult to say what course we ought to take. It's interesting statements.
Well, you got to remember, too, is while there was this idea of the consent of the governed, this idea of the people having a say, at the same time, they didn't necessarily trust the people to make the right decisions or to even be properly informed. And of course, once again, this brings to mind that Winston Churchill quote I like to bring up so much. You know, the best argument against a democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. And the founding fathers felt that way. And so once again, you've got this paradox going on. We want the people involved. We want their say and their consent to be important. But if we just give it all to them, we've got a problem. So they're looking for some type of balance.
He continues, no member of the convention could say what the opinions of his constituents were at this time. Much less could he say what they would think if possessed of the information and lights possessed by the members here, and still less what would be their way of thinking in 6 or 12 months hence. We ought to consider what was right and necessary in itself for the attainment of a proper government. A plan adjusted to this idea will recommend itself. The respectability of this convention will give weight to their recommendation of it. So we're the experts. The people will just trust us. Experience will be constantly urging the adoption of it, and all the most enlightened and respectable citizens will be its advocates. Should we fall short of the necessary and proper point, this influential class of citizens will be turned against the plan, and little support and opposition to them can be gained to it from the unreflecting multitude.
This is a recurring theme here. We better do this right or it won't get ratified, is basically what he's saying.
Yes. Mr. Gary repeated his opinion that it was necessary to consider what the people would approve, just what Doug just said. This had been the policy of all legislators. If the reasoning of Mr. Madison were just, and we suppose a limited monarchy the best form in itself, we ought to recommend it, though the genius of the people was decidedly adverse to it. And having no hereditary distinctions among us, we were destitute of the essential materials for such an innovation.
I like the word innovation. This is the grand experiment. This is innovation never seen before. And Elbridge Gerry recognizes that.
So they put this to a vote. Should we have a triennial election of the first branch? And we have 7 ayes and 3 noes. We are now going to elect Congress once every 3 years.
Well, we got 3 no's and 1 basic no, but it was a split vote.
Yeah. And which was fascinating because obviously we know they settled on a every other year, 2-year elections. So what where did that change happen? It'll come down the road, but it's and it really emphasizes these guys were there to really have discussions, and they were willing to have their minds changed.
One of the things that they realized was, while you want the voice of the people, the term to be shorter, so that, for lack of a better way of saying it, corrections to mistakes can be made quickly. At the same time, they also wanted to make sure that the different parts of government, that the terms varied, so that you wouldn't have the formation of coalitions that would just get elected and reelected together. And so as we progress, you'll see how also the other offices vary when it comes to terms. Go ahead.
All right. Madison starts using a lot of abbreviations, and I'll try to decipher them as well as we can.
Well, things are going quickly. Things are getting busier, and he didn't have shorthand.
A little bit. The words requiring members of, he's talking about years, the first branch to be of the age of years was struck out, and Maryland alone said no. How old do they have to be? Next, he said the words liberal compensation for members, talking about their pay, being considered. Mr. Madison moved to insert the words and fixed, a set salary for Congress. He observed it would be improper to leave the members of the national legislatures to be provided for by the state legislatures, because it would create an improper dependence. Whoever pays you, you owe your allegiance to. And to leave them to regulate their own wages was an indecent thing. Congress does not get to set their own pay scale, because it's indecent, even though that's what we do today, which is indecent.
Yeah, well, that's eventually what they decided upon, and it's not because it's decent, but because of all the indecent things, the least indecent.
And he says it might in time prove a dangerous one, and it did. He thought wheat or some other article of which the average price throughout a reasonable period preceding might be settled in some convenient mode would form a proper standard. Pay them in bread. George Mason's
bread and circuses came to mind. Go ahead.
So we got the circus part, that's for sure. George Mason seconds the motion, adding it would be improper for other reasons to leave the wages to be regulated by the states. He says the different states would make different provision for the representatives, and an inequality would be felt among them, whereas he thought they ought to be in all respects equal. It's a fair point.
Mm-hmm.
Says the parsimony of the states might reduce the provisions so low that, as had already happened in choosing delegates to Congress, the question would be not who were the most fit to be chosen, but who were the most willing to serve.
Well, you got to realize, all of these guys, this is not a job. This is a something that they're going to do on top of, taking care of their family, whatever it is they do as a profession or an occupation. They are serving. This is service. And unless you are very wealthy, you're probably not going to serve. So we want the compensation to be that, A, the person is compensated for what they lose, but B, it'll attract a handful of other people. But at the same time, you don't go too far the other way, because then you're attracting people who are doing it just for the money. So you got to find that a place where it makes it more possible for those of average standard to be able to run, and not just have the wealthy and powerful running for office, but at the same time, you're not making it so that someone can become rich or wealthy and become a, for lack of a better way of saying it, professional politician.
Perish the thought.
Perish the thought.
On a question for inserting the words "and fixed" into the resolution, we got 8 ayes and 3 noes. So that's in there. We now have fixed salaries. Dr. Franklin, spelled funny, said he approved of the amendment just made for rendering their salaries as fixed as possible, but disliked the word liberal. He would prefer the word moderate if it was necessary to substitute any other. He remarked the tendency of abuses in every case to grow of themselves when once begun, and related very pleasantly the progression in ecclesiastical benefices from the first departure from the gratuitous provision of the apostles to the establishment of the papal system. The word liberal was then struck out. Seems unanimously.
Yeah, what he's saying is creeping incrementalism. And when
Very
you
much
begin
so.
to do something liberally, the creeping incrementalism is advanced even more quickly.
On the motion from Mr. Pierce that Congress's wages should be paid out of the national treasury, we have an aye. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ayes. So national treasuries paying their salary, not the states.
Now, I want to correct you there. They don't call it a salary. They ultimately call it an emolument. I'm sorry, they don't call it emolument. They don't call it salary. They eventually call it compensation. Emolument or salary would go to officers like Secretary of State, Secretary of War. Yeah, they called it the Department of War back then.
It is an important distinction. So continue.
These people serving, they're getting a compensation. They never called it a salary or an emolument. It was a compensation. Once again, they don't want these guys, this is not their job. They don't want them getting rich off of it. But at the same time, you need to compensate them because they are taking time away from their lives. They're taking time away from being in the fields for their farm or being on their boat to fish or their practice if they're a lawyer or a doctor or a storekeeper or whatever. And so you want to compensate them for their time. They did not want the politicians to have the job of being a politician.
The next question on the clause relating to the term of service and compensation of the first branch, we have 8 ayes. It passes. On a question for striking out the ineligibility of members of national legislatures to state offices, can you hold office in the state and Congress at the same time? Massachusetts divided, then we have an aye. 1, 2, another divided, 3, 4, 5 ayes. No, the noes take the cake on this one.
You can only receive compensation and serve office one thing at a time.
On the question for agreeing to the clause as amended, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 ayes. So they went through all this and they just ratified. They've now passed it.
I go back up again. Who was the no? There was one no there.
Connecticut.
Okay.
On the question for making members of the national legislature ineligible to any office under the national government for the term of 3 years after ceasing to be members, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 no's. They didn't like that rule.
Maryland was the one that said yes. Basic, what this is saying is after you go out of office, you can't hold anything for a while. The cooling down period. It's sort of like some of the ideas for persons who, like lobbyists or something like that. Well, after you get out of office, there should be so many years before you're allowed to be a lobbyist, which I think is a good idea. Here, they're saying before you jump from one office to the next, there's got to be a cooling down period. They totally rejected that.
Wonder how they would have felt about lobbying.
I have my ideas, and it wouldn't be pretty. Remember what was happening during the American Revolution to Tories? Yeah.
Speaking of which, we just started watching.
Baby.
We just started last night watching Washington Spies. Have you seen it?
I have seen like one episode, and then I never got back to it.
Okay, we're only 3 episodes in, but it is fantastically well done. I am very impressed so far.
It's based on a book I have, actually. But anyway, go ahead.
On the question of making that ineligibility for 1 year, everyone likes that. So 3 years too long, but you got to take a year off. And that passed. On the question moved by Mr. Pinckney for striking out incapable for re-election into the first branch of national legislature for years and subject to recall, agreed to nem.con. I don't know what that abbreviation is meaning, but it sounds like that passed. So you cannot be re-elected into the first branch, he's saying, for certain years. And it put in there, and you'd be subject to recall at all times. The legislature can always recall your Congress critter.
Yeah, well, ultimately they would do that with the Senate, but not the House. Go ahead.
Yeah, and which is interesting because, we've talked about this a lot. And I don't want you to repeat your story because we've done it on this show already a few times, but we no longer can recall our state senators. That's a problem. On the question for striking out from Resolution 5 the words requiring members of the senatorial branch to be of at least blank years at least, there's no number there. I'm not going to worry about the vote because the next one they vote, should there be 30 years as the qualification? It was agreed to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ayes. And that's what ended up passing, would be 30 years minimum age for the Senate. All right, here's where it gets interesting. Mr. Spate moved to fill the blank for the duration of the appointments to the second branch of the national legislature. This is the Senate, with the words 7 years. They want a 7-year Senate. There's going to be some good debate on this.
Sure, that's the second branch is the Senate, because
Yes,
the Senate is the upper house and the House is the lower house.
I am certain. They're referring to the House of Representatives as the first branch the entire time.
Okay. That's interesting because I've also noticed that historians tend to treat it that way, where the House comes first, but yet it's the Senate who's the upper. But the House is always treated as the first. And I've always found that fascinating. And this is kind of clarifying why, I guess. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, Ron and I was on a Ron show once, and he thought the House was the more important of the two. Well, the Senate's got more power. They're
Right.
in there longer. They're supposed to be the aristocracy, the wise, seasoned veterans.
Right. And once again, it's known as the upper house.
Yes, it does have more power than the House. Mr. Sherman says 7 years is too long. He grounded his opposition. He said on the principle that they did their duty well, they would be reelected. And if they acted amiss, an earlier opportunity should be allowed for getting rid of them. He preferred 5 years, which would be between the terms of the first branch and the executive. So in between. Where it gets interesting is we know eventually, and we'll get to that, and so I don't want to dive into it too deeply, but the Senate would be split up into 3 different classes. Every third of the Senate elected every 2 years. If you had a 5-year or a 7-year Senate, you never would have been able to get to that.
Right.
The entire Senate would be turning over every 5 or 7 years. And that would be ugly. Mr. Pierce wants 3 years. He said 7 years would raise an alarm. Great mischiefs had arisen in England from their Septennial Act, which was reprobated by most of their patriotic statesmen. That's that Septennial Act of 1716 I was talking about.
Let's limit their time and the length of their term so that they can be removed if they're no good. Notice they're not talking about term limits. They're talking about limiting the term so that the people or the states can get rid of that person once their term is up.
Mr. Randolph was for 7 years. The democratic licentiousness of the state legislatures proved the necessity of a firm Senate. I love that line. The object of the second branch is to control the democratic branch of the national legislature. Really interesting point he's making here. If it be not a firm body, the other branch being more numerous and coming immediately from the people will overwhelm it. He wants the Senate to be longer in terms.
Guard against democracy. Go ahead.
The Senate of Maryland, constituted on like principles, had been scarcely able to stem the popular torrent. I want to jump into the Constitution of Maryland real quick, okay? And let's zoom this just a little bit. This is one of the, we don't have time to do the full one. The first is a Declaration of Rights. You'll see all kinds of good things in here. One part stood out to me. Redress of grievances, right to petition, levying taxes. Just want to get to that real quick. No man has to give evidence against himself. Excessive bail.
Yeah,
Here it is.
once again, and I've talked about this before in the Constitutional Convention, a lot of these ideas had already been there.
Yeah.
In state constitutions, in their lives, their experiences, and in the British system often. Anyway, go ahead.
Number 25, that a well-regulated militia is the proper and natural defense of a free government. Interesting terminology on that one, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Oops. So let me just get down here. That's all that's their Bill of Rights. They start with that, and then they get to the Constitution. They talk about the House of Delegates shall be chosen in the following manner: all freemen above 21 years old, etc., and with having a freehold of 50 acres of land in the country in which the county in which they offer to vote shall vote for representatives. Okay, so that's for the House. Get down here to the
Skin
Senate.
in the game. You own property. Remember, that's where the taxation is in property.
Number 11, we get to the Senate. That the Senate may be at full and perfect liberty to exercise their judgments, etc. So they were the first to have the bicameral legislature with a different Senate and a different House. And that's why they're looking at, that's why right here, Mr. Randolph is using that as an example. He says, no mischief can be oh, by the way, real quick, this website here, ConSource, is a wonderful resource. They've got all the state constitutions, all kinds of things in here. So if anybody ever wants to geek out on the Constitution, it's called consource.org. Okay, he says no mischief can be apprehended as the concurrence of the other branch, and in some measure of the executive, will in all cases be necessary. A firmness and independence may be more necessary also in this branch, as it ought to guard the Constitution against encroachments of the executive, who will be apt to form combinations with the demagogues of the popular branch. It's a pretty important paragraph right there, I'd say. He's worried about this new executive scheming up with the hordes, the populist hordes of the Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And you need a Senate there to guard the Constitution against that.
In other words, what ultimately is the guards against all that would be the voice of the states. The states would have oversight through the Senate. Ultimately, that's what would happen.
Yeah, I don't know if you didn't get a chance to read it last night when you're doing the Constitution class with Ron, but I put in the chat one of my constitutional amendments would be have a state negative on federal law.
No, I saw that. I saw it. I didn't comment on it, but I definitely saw it.
Yeah, that would have been a rabbit trail.
Nullification with rockets on their feet. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I'm all for having a state constitutional court. So that the states, basically, Congress can pass anything they want, but the president can sign it, but the states have to then say, okay, yeah, this passes muster. I would actually have that check because we've seen what the centralized government has done to us over 200 years.
Mm-hmm.
I digress. Mr. Madison considered 7 years as a term by no means too long. What we wished for was to give the government that stability which was everywhere called for, and which the enemies of the Republican form alleged to be inconsistent with its nature. He wants stability. Remember, they're coming out of the chaos of the Articles of Confederation. That's why they're here.
And once again, what he's calling for is making sure that at least the branch that's going to have people who are skilled in the science of politics, you've heard me say this a few times, have a little bit more time in office. Because what happens when you have people that aren't there very long, he's arguing, is they never become a stable person who understands how it works. And B, and he doesn't say this directly, but you'll see it in other writings. When the longer they're there, the more stable they are, the less influenced they are by the bureaucracy.
His fear was that the popular branch would still be too great an overmatch for it. It was to be much lamented that we had so little direct experience to guide us. We haven't had a whole lot of bicameral legislatures. The Constitution of Maryland was the only one that bore any analogy to this part of the plan.
Now, history also did bear analogies, and he was aware of this. Rome, Britain, etc. Go ahead.
In no instance had the Senate of Maryland created just suspicions of danger from it. In some instances, perhaps it may have erred by yielding to the House of Delegates. In every instance of their opposition to the measures of the House of Delegates, they had with them the suffrages of the most enlightened and impartial people of the other states, as well as of their own. Using the word enlightened. Again, the Senate people are supposed to be the experienced. In the states where senates were chosen in the same manner as the other branches of the legislature and held their seats for 4 years, the institution was found to be no check whatever against the instabilities of the other branches. Other states had popular vote for the Senate, or for the, and did not work, he's saying.
Well, instability because, once again, you've got a populace that is largely uninformed, and persons who are not skilled in the science of politics. And also, these guys are looking at, we need to check against everything. There always needs to be a plan B, I guess. Whenever you allow anything to run or operate unilaterally without some type of check, you're going to run into tyranny.
Yeah, it's just a whim. The whim of the populist idea of the day is trying to avoid the madness of crowds.
Well, this is also an argument against, and for those of you who want me to talk about common law, understand this. This is an argument against English common law. English common law changed with the whims of the people and the rulings of judges. They're trying to get away from that.
And that's the whole concept behind the stability of the Senate. This is going to be the rudder, the anchor. He conceived it to be of great importance that a stable and firm government, stable again, organized in the Republican form, should be held out to the people. If this be not done, and the people be left to judge of this species of government by ye operations of the defective systems under which they now live, it is much to be feared, the time is not distant, when in universal disgust they will renounce the blessings which they have purchased at so dear a rate, and be ready for any change that may be proposed to them. We've got to give the people stability, or eventually they're going to submit to the will of some future tyrant. On the question for 7 years is a term for the second branch. Massachusetts is divided. Connecticut's a no. New York's divided. And then we have an I, 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 and an I. So we have 7-year senates now. So as of this day, we're going to have 3-year terms of Congress and 7-year terms for the Senate. As we now know, that's not what passed.
And part of the problem with that, and this is, and I don't remember if this is a part of the conversation, but it's definitely a problem, is you're trying to set up a system where you don't have both houses necessarily completely being elected the same year. And while it's okay if you have maybe a portion, if you do a 3 and a 7, eventually they're going to rotate around where you're going to have 1 year where they're both, boom, exact same year.
Every
and
21
that
years,
could pose a problem.
Every 21 years, that'll happen. That's my math skills on display, people. 3 times 7. All right, Mr. Butler and Mr. Rutledge proposed that the members of the second branch should be entitled to no salary or compensation for their services. And that passes, I believe. Let's see. Divided, we have an I, 1, 2. Nope, that does not pass. So nope, we are going to.
And remember what I was saying earlier about salary versus compensation.
Mm-hmm.
It separates them here. No salary or compensation. In the Constitution, it says compensation. When it comes to something like Secretary of State, then it uses the word emolument, which is salary. And so I just wanted to point out the distinction here.
It was then moved and agreed that the clauses respecting the stipends and ineligibility of the second branch be the same as of the first branch. There's a con. I don't know if it's talking about Connecticut. I don't know what this abbreviation is. It's going to be disagreeing to the ineligibility.
I would say it's probably Connecticut.
Okay, we're about to change subjects here. It was moved and seconded to alter Resolution 9 so as to read that the jurisdiction of the Supreme Tribunal shall be to hear and determine in the dernier resort, dernier means final, so the last resort, all piracies, felonies, etc. So let's go into Resolution 9 and read it in full. This is from the Virginia plan. We're talking about the Supreme Court, the judicial branch. Resolved that a national judiciary be established to consist of one or more supreme tribunals and of inferior tribunals to be chosen by the national legislature, to hold their offices during good behavior. This is very familiar language. A lot of this makes it into the final constitution. And to receive punctually at stated times fixed compensation for their services, in which no increase or diminution shall be made so as to affect the persons actually in office at the time of such increase or diminution. Now that made it through as well.
Understand, the Virginia plan was written by Madison. People say, well, he's the father of the Constitution. This is largely why. At the time, they're using the Virginia plan as their template. So, okay, we like what we don't like. Okay, let's keep this. Let's get rid of this. Let's change that. This is what they're doing. So when they went into this convention, they didn't just blindly go, okay, let's figure this out. Got some hammers over here, got some nails over here, got some lumber over here. Let's figure it out. There was a blueprint that they were going by, but they were correcting it as they were going along. And that outline or that template was the Virginia plan. Now, yes, there's going to be challenges to the Virginia plan on a number of things. You're going to see, for example, the New Jersey plan appear. But ultimately, the Virginia plan is the basic template.
And I'm showing the South Carolina plan right here. And they got a little bit different orders. But where'd they get here? And South Carolina made its own changes. And some of it actually carried through.
Yeah, well, and you got to realize, too, once again, and I was saying this before, a lot of Madison didn't just go, hey, this is a good idea. He is studying other state constitutions, Virginia, for example. He is also, which is his own state constitution. They're also studying, British law and other law and their own experiences. So once again, this is not something that's just conjured up out of the air.
All right, here's where we get to the meat and bones of what they're going to talk about the rest of the day. Talking about the jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
But the jurisdiction of the inferior tribunals shall be to hear and determine in the first instance, and of the Supreme Tribunal to hear and determine in the dernier resort, last resort. Here's the jurisdiction. All piracies and felons on the high seas, captures from an enemy, cases in which foreigners or citizens of other states applying to such jurisdictions may be interested, or which respect the collection of the national revenue, impeachments of any national officers, and questions which may involve the national peace and harmony. That's a little bit different than we get to in the final constitution.
Well, it is and it isn't. What it's saying is the federal court system is going to be limited to this. Article 3 essentially says the same thing. Words are a little bit different. What develops over time is what's so different. Article 3 basically tells you, if it's not an authority of the federal government, and it's not, and it gives a list, and the list of things are all have to do with, international affairs and things like that, foreign affairs. It doesn't belong to the courts. And then on top of that, and I just talked about this last night, on top of that, with the 11th Amendment, they take away some of it. By the way, we're so worried about this court interfering with states' rights. we're going to take away these things.
Yeah, and this is one of the things we debated in the previous sessions. Should there be a federal negative of state law? And the answer they came up with was no. It's none of the federal government's business. States can handle their own internal affairs. That would be changed very quickly, unfortunately, in the Judiciary Act of 1791, which should have required an amendment.
Well, that established the groundwork for it, but it really didn't go into stone until Marbury versus Madison. But it definitely established the groundwork to head in that direction.
Okay. So they moved and seconded Resolution 9 to read that the jurisdiction of the Supreme Tribunal shall be to hear and determine in the last resort all piracies felonies. It looks to me like that's about the exact same, so I'm not sure what they're debating here. It was moved and seconded to strike out all piracies and felonies on the high seas, which was agreed to.
Yeah, but that comes back, by the way.
It does. It was moved to agreed to strike out all captures from an enemy, which actually did remain out of it.
Well, what they did is they reworded it, captures on land and sea. But anyway, go ahead.
It was moved and agreed. I wish they would have actually printed up these debates, because that would have been, to me, it's such an important topic. Maybe we'll get to it later. It was moved and agreed to strike out other states and insert 2 distinct states of the Union. Fine, that's semantics, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was moved and agreed to postpone the consideration of Resolution 9 relating to the judiciary. So we'll get back. We're going to circle back, they said.
And one thing about the judiciary is they're still forming the ideas and working on the judiciary up to 4 weeks before the last day. This is something that was not the federal judiciary was not something agreed upon quickly, and there were those in attendance at times that actually argue against even having a federal judiciary. States have their judicial systems, but then of course the argument is, what about disputes between the states? What about maritime law? What about cases in which the United States is a party? That's what really were the arguments that made sure we had a federal judiciary.
And I think we had it. It made perfect sense to have a federal judiciary, but it should have stayed in its lane. That's really the issue here. And They didn't. Unfortunately, the judicial tyranny started right almost immediately, to the point now where there's no check on judicial power. The committee then rose and the House adjourned for the day. All right, how are we doing on time? We're just about an hour. You want to start on June 13th for a little bit?
No, let's set it aside for its own time, so we're not splitting it up. If we can keep the days by themselves, that's better. But that said, I understand Warhamster's urgency, because this is a long document, and he doesn't want to be doing this show when he gets to his 100th birthday. So I understand the urgency. But I think this is a good breaking point, and when we get into the next day and you go through it, you'll kind of see why I wanted to separate them a little bit. That said, folks, this is something you can also look at yourself. I appreciate you're here. We appreciate that you're here. We appreciate that you trust how we see it, and notice that we put it on the screen so you can see it as well. We're not just because we said so. But on the same token, I urge you, I don't just recommend, I urge you to go to Avalon Project and read it yourself, and other resources. Because this is something too important not to take seriously. And I think that for those of you who really want to be an informed voter and understand the arguments of certain sides of the aisle, so to speak, when it comes to the political discourse of the day, this is valuable. This is invaluable. It is beyond important for us to be educated in the affairs of early America and understand why our system is what it is. You have people now even arguing that the idea of natural rights are God-given. is ridiculous, and comparing it to Iran. Not that I'm going to mention names, Tim Kaine. And if you know why it's there, what it is, then you can discern the what is right, what is wrong, and call out the idiots for what they are. And so this is so important. And notice I'm not getting into party per se. This is about the Constitution, and this is about the foundational principles of this country. And when we need to understand them if we are to defend them.
Yeah, and as you're going through this on your own, take the time and, I don't care if you just use Wikipedia, look up some of this historical context. History is fascinating, and the parallels you can draw from the past to help you make decisions in the present, they really matter.
Right.
We gave you all kinds of different little historical tidbits today. But most people have no reason to ever know it. So
right.
To me, it's an intellectual exercise. It's phenomenal. It's a really, I've enjoyed doing this series quite a bit. All right, let's wrap it up, Doug. Just tell them real quick where they can find you.
DouglasVGibbs.com. Now, if you've been visiting, you say, hey, man, there's no new stuff. Website's got kind of a turmoil right now. We got some stuff going on. Once it's ready to roll again, I'll start putting on some new content. It's been a little over a week, but if you've never been to the site, there's plenty of content I've written that's still applicable. Go to the blog, check it out. If you want to hear what I've got to say, I am on the radio or online every day of the week except for Monday. Tuesday, 3:30, MrConstitution.com, mr-constitution.com. Then Wednesdays and Thursdays at ZakiRadio.com, that Wednesday show with War Hamster here. And then Friday, I am on Patriot Soapbox from 2 to 4 Pacific. Saturday, KMET at 1 Pacific. KPRZ, KCBQ at 8 p.m. Pacific. Find it online on all of the podcast platforms, Mr. Constitution Hour by Douglas V. Gibbs. And then Sunday nights with my good friend Alan Myers. So there you go. So search me online.
You are probably watching this on my Rumble channel, which is War Space Hamster on Rumble. I'm also starting to get some traction on my YouTube channel because Doug's actually one of the few guests I have on that doesn't get me banned from YouTube. And of course, you can always find me on X, which is war_hamster1776, or Truth Social, which is war_hamster. Doug, it's been a pleasure. Look forward to seeing you in a couple hours.
Always.
And we'll get to the next day in the Madison's notes next time we meet.
All right.
Cheers.
See you then.
Cheers.